Commemorating the wars and conflicts of our nation's past and honoring all those who served in them has always been a VFW priority. We hope to rally local level support of national endeavors because we know that working together, America's heroes will never be forgotten. It's one of our basic tenets. It's just another way we are able to give back to those who have sacrificed so much for our way of life. As a World War I commemoration supporter, the VFW helps spotlight events, publications, productions, activities, and programs that allow people in the U.S. and abroad to learn about the history of the Great War and the United States' involvement in that war and the war's effect on the remainder of the 20th century. And while commemorating and honoring the participation of the United States and its citizens in that war effort. In April, we were the presenting sponsor for the commemoration festivities in Kansas City, Missouri, and we continue to support the Commission through the 100 Cities, 100 Memorials campaign, which aims to restore World War I memorials across the United States. Today, we are joined by World War I Centennial Vice Chairman, Edwin Fountain. In 2008, Edwin co-founded the World War I Memorial Foundation, which has advocated for the establishment of a national World War I memorial in our nation's capital to honor all Americans who lost their lives during that war. In addition to his role in the World War I Centennial Commission, he is currently General Counsel for American Battle Monuments Commission. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Edwin Fountain. Edwin.
Thank you, Commander Duffy, and members of leadership, and all of you. It's a privilege for me to be here today. I'm very proud. I'm a grandson of a VFW member who served in the Great War, and so it's my great honor to be here speaking to you today. World War I Centennial Commission was formed in 2013 by an act of Congress and given the broad mission of educating the American people about the causes and consequences of this great conflict 100 years ago and commemorating the service and sacrifice of American men and women in that war. Now you might ask, why should we care about the World War I Centennial? It took place 100 years ago. There are no veterans of World War I out there among you today. The last one died 6 years ago. I could go on for an hour or so about how World War I continues to shape the country and the world that we live in today in many profound ways, but let me bring it a little closer to home. First of all, World War I is part of your own history. There on the left, you have General John J. Pershing, commander of the American Expeditionary Forces in World War I and a VFW member. Next to him is Sergeant Alvin York, who famously killed 23 Germans and captured 132 more in a single day in the Argonne Forest and was a VFW member. It was the VFW's role in advocating for benefits for World War I veterans in the 1920s and 30s that was a turning point in this organization's history, and you can measure that by the growth in the organization's membership. In 1915, before the U.S. entered the war, the VFW had 5,000 members. By 1921, there were 60,000. And in 1936, still a few years before we entered World War II, there were 200,000 members of the VFW. Second reason is because the character and the magnitude of the service and sacrifice of World War I soldiers was every bit as great and profound as that of you and your comrades. Second from the right in this picture is Major Charles Whittlesey, commander of the Lost Battalion. And if you don't know that story, it's one of the great stories in American military history. Major Whittlesey led 500 men into the Argonne Forest, where they became cut off and surrounded by Germans when the troops on their flanks failed to keep up. For 6 days, they held out against repeated German assaults. They ran out of ammunition, they ran out of food, they had to crawl through gunfire to get water, they took bandages off of dead men and reused them on the wounded. They were shelled by their own artillery. They had to send a carrier pigeon back to the back lines to tell them to stop the artillery. And finally, after 6 days, they were rescued by other American forces. And of the 550 men that went into that ravine, 200 walked out. And on the far right is Dan Daly, a Marine sergeant in the Battle of Belleau Wood in June 1918. Belleau Wood, of course, was the birth of the modern Marine Corps. And it was there that Dan Daly uttered one of the great battle cries of American history, "Come on, you sons of bitches, do you want to live forever?" There are a million more stories like that from World War I, just as there are millions of stories like that from all the subsequent wars since. And I don't need to talk to you about the brotherhood and the sisterhood among veterans that transcends service and transcends time. But I think we see that in World War I. I look at these faces, and I don't see faces of 100 years ago. I see faces that stare out at us from tintypes from the Civil War, and I see faces that we see in video today from Afghanistan and Iraq. And that brings me to the third reason why you should care about the World War I Centennial. 4.7 million American men and women served in that war. As a percentage of the American population, that would be the equivalent of more than 13 million Americans being in service today. 200,000 of them came home with terrible physical and psychological wounds. 116,000 never came home at all. Those men and women deserve to be commemorated. And just as importantly, by remembering those servicemen and women today, 100 years later, we tell those veterans still living today, and we tell those still serving today, that they too will be remembered 100 years from now. As Commander Duffy said, the VFW has been an active supporter of the efforts of the World War I Centennial Commission. VFW was a lead sponsor. Well, first, in terms of education, our first and foremost mission is education, because far too many Americans today know far too little about the war. And we're working with a number of national education partners to educate Americans of all generations through a variety of channels, and the VFW has contributed to that effort through articles in its own publications. The VFW was a lead founding sponsor of our April 6th commemoration in Kansas City of the centennial of American entry into the war. VFW members and posts around the country have actively helped us build a network of state centennial commissions around the country. We've got those state commissions standing up now in 42 out of the 50 states. The VFW has been an active partner in those efforts. The VFW is a supporting sponsor of our 100 Cities, 100 Memorials program, which aims to bring attention to and help renovate World War I memorials around the country. Remember that until the Vietnam Veterans Memorial was built in 1982, we really didn't have national war memorials. Memorialization was done at the local level, starting with the Civil War, then continuing through World War I. And a lot of those memorials are now hidden in plain sight, neglected. And so this 100 Cities, 100 Memorials program is a matching grant program to help provide funds to refurbish some of those memorials. 22 VFW posts have submitted nominations in support of local memorials, of which they are stewards, and we look forward to continuing to partner with the VFW in that effort. But our big mission, not our only mission, but our biggest one, is the establishment of a National World War I Memorial in Washington, D.C. Again, in 1982, we dedicated the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, followed by Korea and then World War II. And now it's time to complete the quartet of national memorials in Washington to the great wars of the 20th century, of the American century, by building a memorial for the war that started it all, a war that saw greater loss of American life than Korea and Vietnam combined. Now, this map's not very good, but it's meant to give you a sense of the location. Federal law prohibits us from building a new memorial on the mall itself. And so we asked Congress for authorization to proceed on the next best site, which is Pershing Park. And you can't quite tell here, but it's about a block from the White House, 2 blocks from the mall, on Pennsylvania Avenue, which of course is the great avenue connecting the Capitol building with the White House. The main feature of this memorial will be this monumental 65-foot-long bronze bas-relief wall with water cascading down the sides into the pool of water before it. Like the Vietnam Memorial, visitors will be able to go right up to the memorial and touch it and have a very personal interaction with it. But rather than names, the memorial wall will have a series of images centered on the recurring image of a soldier who leaves his family, answers the call to arms and joins the nation's march to war, experiences the violent chaos and passion of battle, suffers the aftermath and loss of that battle, And if you, I don't have a pointer here, but about two-thirds of the way to the right, we asked the sculptor to illustrate for us the 1,000-yard stare. Give us a moment where the soldier stares out directly from the memorial and engages directly with the viewer so that they can share a moment of reflection on the loss involved in the war. And then finally, after reflecting on his accomplishments and the accomplishments of American troops, the soldier marches proudly off stage into the American century. In the first scene, the soldier takes his helmet from his young daughter. In the last scene, he returns the helmet to her, marking the passing of the torch to the greatest generation, because after all, it was the men and women of the World War I era who raised the greatest generation, who would then have to return to Europe and to the Pacific to fight another war 20 years later. We're working with VFW leadership to explore ways for the VFW nationally and for individual posts to support this memorial, but one way you can do so is through our Poppy program. And more information about this is available at the World War I Centennial booth out in the exhibit hall. But briefly, for $65, a post can buy a box that contains 60 packets of poppy seeds, and the memorial effort nets about $45 from that sale. And the post can then sell each of those packets for $2 each, keep $1 for itself, and return the other dollar to the Centennial Commission. And in that way, the Post breaks even on its investment but raises money for this important national effort, which, by the way, has to be paid for entirely by private donations. There will be no taxpayer dollars spent on this memorial. 55 VFW posts so far have contributed to this effort. And to use one example, Post 6181 in Ashland, Tennessee, bought 30 packets for just under $2,000. That raised about $1,400 right off the bat for the memorial effort. It sold 1,800 individual poppy packets to raise another $3,600. Half of that went back to the Post, the other half went to the memorial. If every VFW post did that, we could raise $20 million, which would be more than half the cost of this memorial. So that's a brief recap, a brief summary of our activities. The Centennial for the United States began in earnest in April and will really pick up speed next year when we celebrate 100 years of the American fighting in the war. There's more information out in our booth in the exhibit hall. I encourage you to go onto our website, www.cc.org. And I forgot one thing, one great service the VFW has already provided to us. It gave us Deborah Anderson as a member of our commission, and she's been a tremendous asset to it. And so I want to thank you for your support, past and ongoing, and I want to thank you for letting me speak to you today. And most of all, thank you all for your service. Thank you very much.